Historically, Protestant and evangelical thinkers have sort of shied away from union with Christ. And you think, well, why would this be so? Why would it not get the attention that it deserves, given how central its thinking is? And let me just say, the good news is that this shortcoming is really being remedied in the last 15, 20 years. I mean, there are just I can think of at least a dozen or maybe even more really great books on union with Christ. And there's some great teaching and preaching going on now in which union with Christ is being emphasized in the way that I think it should be. But it does raise the question, why is it that evangelicalism has shied away from it? And the reason is because there are a couple of significant misfires throughout church history. And I'm now thinking of both Eastern Orthodoxy with its emphasis on deification and Roman Catholicism with its sacramental understanding of union with Christ. And I'm oversimplifying. I just want to admit I'm oversimplifying a bit in these presentations because there's more agreement in the Eastern Church and the Roman Church in this than I may be sounding like I'm presenting. But without a doubt, the Eastern Church puts its emphasis upon deification. And even though there's a sacramental element to the Eastern Church, it is the Roman Church that really has this sacramental, very concrete, physical presentation of union with Christ. And we'll see that. So first, let's talk about Eastern Orthodoxy in its understanding of union with Christ as the deification of the believer. And many times whenever one reads or listens to an Eastern Orthodox preacher or teacher, they'll talk about the process of theosis. That's the word they'll use. And they will understand union with Christ to be a mystical process which results in the deification of the believer. Now, a lot of us become very nervous whenever we see an expression like that, the deification of the believer. And so you have to pay very close attention to what they do and don't mean by that. Orthodox teaching relies heavily on an expression used by the Apostle Peter in 2 Peter 1:4, in which he describes Christians as being partakers of the divine nature. And they interpret Peter to be saying that union with Christ brings about our divinization through a development, like I said, that they sometimes will call theosis. Now, what do they mean? Well, let me, I hope I'm saying his name right. Stavropoulos is a theologian who gave a message on the deification of the believer. And here is the quote. He says, "In other words, we are each destined to become a God, to be like God himself, to be united with him. It means union of the human with the divine. That, in its essence, is the meaning of theosis." Now, when he says we are each destined to become a God, whenever you read him further, you begin to realize he's not talking about some kind of Mormonism where we all have this polytheistic understanding that we all end up being individual gods with our own planet. No, it's a more pantheistic idea that we become absorbed in some very profound way into the Godhead. And so notice that's what he says next. It means the union of the human with the divine. So this is not a polytheistic way of thinking like the Mormons think whenever they talk about the deification of the believer. No, it goes the other way, more towards pantheism. The goal of this mystical approach is to lose yourself in God and to be eventually, as Stavropoulos calls it, to be eventually fused with God. And so what Christians are encouraged to do so is to go through a step-by-step process of deification that is accomplished by great effort. And now, theosis is a gift given from God. However, as Stavropoulos explains it, it is received in conjunction with our own efforts. Now, as I said, and this is a critique made by many, that this mysticism often has pantheistic overtones and is very dependent upon uh, uh, a philosophy known as Neoplatonism. And Neoplatonic thought dominated in the early church and in the Greco-Roman world in the days of the early church. And so many of the early church fathers interpreted Christianity through the lens of Neoplatonic thinking, and that is why one sees this kind of thinking in Greek Orthodoxy. In fact, there are a number of Greek Orthodox theologians and preachers who were overtly pantheistic, and so there were those who were quite explicitly mystics, and so this would be a bit of a tendency to pantheism. Now, if you have this very mystical, pantheistic interpretation of union with Christ, Roman Catholicism, on the other hand, has a very almost literal interpretation of union. And what they do is they take the sacramental approach, and they understand that a Christian is united with the Lord as being accomplished through quite literal, physical, concrete ways. And what are those literal, physical, concrete ways? The sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper. You see, what they would argue is that a person is united with Christ when he or she are united with the church through the ordinance or the sacrament, as they would see it, the sacrament of baptism. So, according to Roman Catholic doctrine, a person enters into Christ when he enters into the Catholic Church through the sacrament of baptism. So, and you have in the Roman Catholic Dictionary, Sacramentum Mundi, under under the heading of baptism, they would say, in baptism, then, the church possesses something that is alive and operative. Notice, baptism, is this living operation. Notice, it unites us, and there's the language of union with Christ's death and resurrection. By uniting us with Christ's death and resurrection, it enables us to the hope of the great eschatological fulfillment in the future. And so how is one united with Christ in Roman Catholic thinking? You're baptized, and typically baptized as an infant. So how is one incorporated into Christ in Roman Catholic thinking? Through becoming incorporated into Christ through baptism. So then how does Christ enter us? Well, again, it's in a very physical, literal, tangible way, and that is we receive Christ. We're brought into Christ through baptism, and then Roman Catholicism says Christ enters into us through the Mass, through the taking of the bread. So, in contrast to baptism, Christ enters into the practicing Catholic whenever the parishioner ingests the Eucharist. The elements of the Lord's Supper are understood to be the body and blood of Christ. So Christ actually enters into the partaker of the supper through the Eucharist. In fact, the picture I have here, the little slide there, shows Jesus, his blood dripping down into the cup and the bread. This is my body. They understand that to be an actual reality. There's not much metaphorical about this approach. And so what you have then in both the Eastern Orthodoxy, which its tendency to pantheism, and then the Roman Catholic view with its tendency to tangible, concrete understandings, these are two misfires. Now, what are the results of the Roman Catholic concrete way of thinking? Well, what happens then is the Roman Catholic Church becomes the repository of grace. If they're the door to the church, and they are the ones who possess Christ in the bread and the wine, they own salvation. They are the doorkeepers of salvation. So the threat of excommunication is a powerful weapon that the Catholic Church has wielded on numerous occasions. And so what this does is that it has the odd effect of implementing the necessity of good works for salvation. This is because salvation is now a process that must be maintained through the sacraments. So, In the sacramental view of the union with Christ, notice how tightly soteriology and ecclesiology are intertwined. So the sacramental view of union with Christ, uh, in short, it contradicts the biblical teaching that the work of the cross has eliminated the need for human mediators. And the deification, as I said, if the deification view over spiritualizes the concept, then the sacramental view, in my opinion, is makes it overly literal, overly concrete. So, um, what does the definition, or what does union with Christ actually mean? Well, that's what we'll pick up in the next section.